Have you ever been the person who quietly keeps everything running smoothly, only to be treated like you're completely replaceable? That was my reality for 8 years at Morrison Industries, and I'm about to tell you how dramatically wrong they were about that. My name is Rebecca, and I was Morrison Industries' Senior Tax Compliance Officer. While that might sound like a boring desk job to most people, what I actually did was save that company millions of dollars every single year through my intricate knowledge of manufacturing tax incentives that most accountants didn't even know existed. You see, Morrison Industries manufactured specialized industrial equipment, and there were dozens of federal and state tax breaks specifically designed for companies like ours. The catch? These incentives were buried in thousands of pages of constantly changing tax code, with application deadlines that shifted quarterly and qualification requirements so specific that missing even one small detail could cost you the entire benefit. I didn't just know these programs existed, I had memorized every nuance, every deadline, every loophole. I knew that if we purchased certain raw materials from suppliers in designated economic zones before March 15, we could claim a 12% tax credit. I knew that hiring military veterans for specific manufacturing roles qualified us for additional deductions, but only if their paperwork was filed within 60 days and included 3 particular forms that most HR departments had never heard of. Every month, I would meticulously track our purchases, our hiring, our equipment investments, and our research expenses, then weave them together into a complex web of tax strategies that consistently saved Morrison Industries between $2 and $3 million annually. That's not an exaggeration, I have the documentation to prove it. But here's what made my job truly challenging: these weren't simple forms you could fill out once and forget. The tax code changed constantly. What worked in January might be obsolete by April. I spent my evenings reading Federal Register updates, attending virtual seminars with tax attorneys, and networking with other compliance officers to stay ahead of every single change. I had spreadsheets tracking deadlines for the next 18 months, color-coded by priority and potential savings. The irony was that my work was almost completely invisible to management. When the company's tax bill came in significantly lower than projected year after year, they just assumed that was normal. When we sailed through IRS audits without a single penalty or adjustment, they thought it was luck. The owner, Mr. Morrison Sr., had built the company from nothing and understood that every dollar saved mattered, but he'd stepped back from daily operations 3 years ago, leaving his son Marcus in charge. Marcus Morrison was the kind of person who measured success by what he could see and touch. He understood sales numbers, production quotas, and equipment purchases. But tax compliance? To him, it was just paperwork that happened automatically. He had no idea that behind every clean audit and every massive tax savings was me, working 12-hour days during tax season and coming in on weekends to make sure we never missed a critical deadline. The most frustrating part was watching Marcus take credit for the company's financial health during board meetings. He'd proudly announce our efficient operations and smart financial management while I sat in the back of the conference room, knowing that a significant portion of our profitability came from tax strategies he couldn't even pronounce, let alone understand. My immediate supervisor, Tom, was the CFO, and he at least appreciated what I did. He'd often tell me that I was irreplaceable, that my expertise was worth its weight in gold. But Tom was nearing retirement and spent most of his time focused on high-level financial planning, leaving me to operate independently. This autonomy was both a blessing and a curse. It allowed me to work efficiently, but it also meant that very few people in the company truly understood the complexity of what I did every day. Then there was my health situation. 2 years ago, I was diagnosed with kidney disease and had to start dialysis 3 times a week. The treatments took about 4 hours each, and I scheduled them for early morning on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays so they wouldn't interfere with critical work periods. Sometimes the treatments ran long or I felt tired afterward, which meant I'd arrive at the office around 10 instead of 8. But I always made up the time. If I was late in the morning, I'd work until 7 or 8 that evening. During busy periods, I'd come in on weekends to ensure everything stayed on track. My work never suffered. Every deadline was met, every form was filed perfectly, every tax strategy was executed flawlessly. I communicated with Tom about my schedule, and he was completely supportive. As far as I knew, my medical situation was private and had zero impact on my job performance. But what I didn't realize was that Marcus and the HR department were watching my arrival times and making note of every late morning, without bothering to check my departure times or weekend work. They saw me as someone with attendance issues rather than someone managing a serious health condition while maintaining exceptional work quality. The final layer of injustice was that I trained our junior accountant, Amy, to handle basic compliance tasks so there would always be backup coverage. Amy was bright and eager, but she understood maybe 20% of what I did. She could handle routine filings and simple calculations, but the strategic tax planning, the complex multi-state issues, the intricate timing of various incentive programs, all of that was far beyond her current skill level. It would take years of intensive training for anyone to develop the expertise I'd built over nearly a decade. Yet somehow, management had convinced itself that tax compliance was just a matter of following simple procedures that anyone could learn quickly. They had no idea they were sitting on a powder keg, and I was the only one who knew how to keep it from exploding. Everything changed on a Thursday morning in October. I had arrived at the office around 9:45 a.m. after a particularly draining dialysis session, and I was settling in to review some updated regulations when Marcus stormed into my office with Linda from HR trailing behind him. "Rebecca, we need to talk," Marcus said, his face flushed with anger. "There's been a serious problem with the Patterson Industries account, and I need answers." Patterson Industries was one of our biggest clients. We manufactured custom equipment for their food processing plants. It was a complex account with specific tax implications because their equipment qualified for agricultural processing incentives, but only if installed in facilities that met very particular criteria. "What kind of problem?" I asked, genuinely confused. The Patterson account was one of my success stories. I'd identified a combination of federal agricultural incentives and state manufacturing credits that saved them hundreds of thousands in taxes, which they split with us as part of our service contract. "They're saying we screwed up their tax filings and they're facing a massive penalty from the state," Marcus said, waving a printed email. "They want to terminate their contract and they're threatening to sue us for the penalty amount. Linda here says this is clearly a pattern of negligence related to your attendance issues." I felt like I'd been slapped. "Marcus, that's impossible. I handled their filings personally, and everything was perfect." "Can I see the email?" "You don't need to see anything," Linda interjected. "We've been documenting your chronic lateness for months. You've been arriving late 3 days a week consistently, and now we have a major client claiming our tax work is wrong. The pattern is obvious." "My arrival time has nothing to do with the quality of my work," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "And I can guarantee you that Patterson's filings were correct. There has to be some misunderstanding." "The misunderstanding," Marcus interrupted, "is that we've been too patient with your attendance problems. Patterson specifically mentioned that their tax advisor at the state level said our calculations were completely wrong. They're facing a 6-figure penalty because of your mistake." I stood up, my mind racing. Something was very wrong here. I knew Patterson's tax situation better than anyone, and there was absolutely no way I had made an error of that magnitude. "Marcus, please, just let me call Patterson directly and find out exactly what." "You will not contact our clients about your mistakes," Linda said firmly. "That would be completely inappropriate and could make the legal situation worse." "This isn't a mistake," I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "I've been handling complex tax compliance for 8 years without a single error that cost us money. The Patterson account specifically saved them over $300,000 last year through incentives I identified. There's no way." "Enough," Marcus said, cutting me off. "The bottom line is that we have an angry client, a potential lawsuit, and an employee who can't even be bothered to show up on time. Linda has been telling me for months that we need younger, more dedicated people in critical positions. People who actually want to be here." The words hit me like a physical blow. "More dedicated?" "Marcus, I work 60-hour weeks during tax season. I come in on weekends. I've saved this company millions of dollars. What you've done is create a mess that's going to cost us one of our biggest clients, Linda said. And frankly, your attitude right now is exactly the problem. Instead of taking responsibility, you're making excuses and getting defensive. I looked back and forth between them, and suddenly I understood what was happening. This wasn't about Patterson Industries at all. This was about them wanting to get rid of me, and they were using some kind of misunderstanding as an excuse. I want to see the email from Patterson, I said firmly. And I want to call them myself to understand exactly what they think is wrong. Because I guarantee you that. What you're going to do, Marcus interrupted, is clean out your desk. Linda, give her the paperwork. Linda handed me a folder. We're terminating your employment effective immediately. You'll receive 2 weeks severance pay, and your health insurance will continue through the end of the month. Security will escort you out once you've packed your personal items. I stared at the termination letter, reading the words but not quite believing them. After 8 years of flawless work, after saving them millions of dollars, after working through my health issues without ever letting my performance slip, they were firing me based on a client complaint they wouldn't even let me investigate. This is insane, I said quietly. You have no idea what you're doing. The Patterson account isn't the problem, something else is going on, and if you'd just let me make one phone call. The decision is final, Marcus said. And honestly, Rebecca, this conversation is just confirming that we're making the right choice. We need people who take responsibility for their mistakes, not people who argue and make excuses. 20 minutes later, I was sitting in my car in the parking lot with a box of personal items, staring at the building where I'd spent 8 years of my life. I felt numb, betrayed, and completely bewildered. They'd refused to let me access my computer files, refused to let me call Patterson, refused to even show me the specific complaint. They'd just decided I was guilty and that was the end of it. As I drove home, one thought kept running through my mind: they had no idea what they'd just done to themselves. And they were about to find out. The first call came on a Friday, exactly 1 week after they'd fired me. It was from Amy, the junior accountant I'd trained, and she sounded panicked. Rebecca, I know I'm not supposed to call you, but I don't know what to do, she whispered into the phone. Tom is asking me about the quarterly manufacturing incentive filings, and I can't find any of your documentation. Do you know where you kept the calculations for the equipment depreciation schedules? I felt a mixture of sympathy for Amy and grim satisfaction. Amy, those aren't just calculations you can look up. Each client's equipment qualifies for different incentive programs based on when they bought it, where it's installed, and how it's being used. The documentation is in the shared drive, but you need to understand the underlying tax code to know which forms to file and when. But Tom needs the filings submitted by Monday or we'll miss the deadline, Amy said, her voice getting higher. He said if we miss this deadline, we'll lose about $800,000 in tax credits for this quarter alone. I closed my eyes. The quarterly manufacturing incentive filings were one of the most complex aspects of my job. They required cross-referencing equipment purchases with installation dates, calculating depreciation under 3 different methods, and choosing the optimal strategy for each piece of equipment. It had taken me 3 years to master the process. Amy, you need to tell Tom that this isn't something you can learn over a weekend. Those filings require. He says I have to figure it out because you're gone and there's no one else, Amy interrupted. He's really stressed because Marcus is asking questions about whether we can still claim all the same tax benefits without you. After I hung up, I felt sorry for Amy, but I also felt a dark sense of vindication. They'd thought my job was simple paperwork that anyone could handle. They were about to learn otherwise. The second call came the following Tuesday. This time it was Jake, one of the sales managers I'd worked with closely on client tax strategies. Rebecca, I heard what happened and I think it's complete bullshit, Jake said. But I'm calling because I'm getting weird questions from clients about their tax situations, and I don't know how to answer them. What kind of questions? Well, Henderson Manufacturing called and said their accountant is questioning some of the tax credits we claimed on their behalf. They want documentation for the rural development incentives we used last year. And Coastal Processing is asking about whether they'll still qualify for the agricultural equipment deductions going forward. I used to just refer these questions to you, but now there's no one who understands the programs well enough to answer them, I finished. Exactly. Amy is trying, but she told Henderson Manufacturing that she wasn't sure if their equipment qualified for rural development credits, and now they're questioning whether any of their tax strategies are solid. I think they're getting spooked. Jake's call was followed by another call on Wednesday, this time from my former colleague in accounts receivable, Maria. Rebecca, something strange is happening with our state tax filings, Maria said. The state sent us a notice saying we missed a deadline for some kind of manufacturing tax credit renewal, and now they're saying we owe back taxes plus penalties. The amount is, well, it's over $200,000. My stomach dropped. Which manufacturing credit? Something about equipment installed in designated economic zones? I don't really understand it, but Tom is freaking out because Marcus is saying this proves that our tax compliance was already a mess before you left. I knew exactly what had happened. There was an annual renewal requirement for equipment-based tax credits in designated economic zones, and the deadline was October 31st. I had it marked in my calendar and was planning to file the renewal the week I got fired. With everything that happened, the deadline had passed unnoticed. It's not complicated, but you have to know the deadline exists. And now that it's passed, the penalty is automatic. Is there any way to fix it? You can appeal, but you need to show good cause for missing the deadline. The state doesn't usually accept "we forgot" as a valid reason. By Thursday, I was getting calls from vendors, clients, and even some of our competitors who had heard rumors that Morrison Industries was having tax problems. The business community in our industry was fairly small, and word was spreading that we'd missed critical deadlines and were facing significant penalties. The most interesting call came from Patricia Williams, the CFO at Blackstone Industries, Morrison's biggest competitor. Patricia and I had known each other professionally for years through industry conferences and tax seminars. Rebecca, I heard through the grapevine that you're no longer at Morrison, Patricia said. I have to say, I'm surprised. Your tax expertise was legendary in our industry. Thank you, Patricia. It's been an unexpected transition. I'm sure it has. And I don't want to be inappropriate, but I also heard that Morrison is having some compliance issues since your departure. Is that true? I hesitated. I didn't want to badmouth my former employer, but the facts were becoming public knowledge anyway. Let's just say that complex tax compliance requires very specialized knowledge, and that knowledge isn't easily replaceable. I see, Patricia said thoughtfully. Well, I hope you know that your reputation in this industry is excellent. If you're considering new opportunities, I'd love to have a conversation. That weekend, I decided to call Patterson Industries directly. Marcus and Linda had fired me partially based on their complaint, and I needed to understand what had actually happened. I called Patterson's CFO, Robert Chen, who I'd worked with for 3 years. Rebecca. I was wondering when I'd hear from you, Robert said warmly. I heard you left Morrison. That's a real loss for them. Thank you, Robert. Actually, I'm calling because there seems to have been some confusion about your tax filings. I heard there was a problem with penalties? Robert laughed. Oh, that. Yeah, that was a mess, but it had nothing to do with your work. Our internal accountant made an error when transferring your calculations to our state filing system. She misread one of your numbers and entered it wrong, which triggered a penalty notice. We caught the error and corrected it within a week. I thought I explained that clearly in my email to Marcus. I felt like someone had poured ice water over my head. Robert, are you saying the tax penalty wasn't caused by incorrect calculations from Morrison? God, no. Your work is always perfect. The error was entirely on our end. We even sent Marcus a follow-up email explaining exactly what happened and thanking Morrison for the excellent work. Why? Because Marcus told me that Patterson was threatening to sue Morrison for tax compliance errors, and he used that as justification for firing me. There was a long pause. Rebecca, that's completely wrong. We never threatened to sue anyone, and we certainly never blamed Morrison for our internal error. In fact, we were hoping to expand our relationship with Morrison this year because your tax strategies have saved us so much money. After I hung up with Robert, I sat in my kitchen for a long time, processing what I'd learned. Marcus and Linda had fired me based on a complete misunderstanding of a client email. They'd refused to let me see the email or call the client to clarify, and they'd used their misinterpretation as evidence that I was incompetent. But what made it even worse was the realization that they'd probably been looking for an excuse to fire me for months. Linda had apparently been documenting my attendance issues and convincing Marcus that they needed someone younger and more dedicated. The Patterson situation had just given them the excuse they were looking for. Meanwhile, Morrison Industries was falling apart without me. They'd missed critical deadlines, faced significant penalties, and were losing the confidence of their clients. The company I'd helped save millions of dollars was now hemorrhaging money because they'd decided I was replaceable. The irony was perfect, but I took no joy in it. I was too angry, too hurt, and too focused on figuring out what to do next. On Monday morning, exactly 3 weeks after my termination, I received 2 phone calls that would change everything. The first call was from Tom, the CFO at Morrison Industries. He sounded exhausted. Rebecca, I know this is awkward given how things ended, but I need to ask you some questions about the Hartwell Industries account. We're facing a state audit. And Amy can't locate the documentation for the research and development tax credits we claimed on their behalf. Hello, Tom, I said coolly. How can I help you? The state auditor is asking for detailed documentation showing how Hartwell's equipment modifications qualified for R&D credits. Amy found some of your files, but she says the calculations don't make sense to her, and she can't explain the methodology to the auditor. I wasn't surprised. The Hartwell R&D credits were one of my most complex projects. Their equipment modifications fell into a gray area between manufacturing improvements and research activities, and I'd spent weeks researching case law and IRS guidelines to develop a defensible strategy for claiming the credits. Tom, those R&D credit calculations required extensive research into federal guidelines and precedent cases. The documentation is detailed, but you need to understand the underlying legal framework to explain it to an auditor. I know, Tom said, sounding defeated. Rebecca, I need to be honest with you. This place has been chaos since you left. We've missed deadlines, we're facing penalties, and now we have this audit. Marcus is finally starting to understand what you actually did here, but it might be too late. What do you mean? We've lost 2 major clients who were concerned about our tax compliance capabilities. The Patterson situation turned out to be a misunderstanding. They never blamed us for anything, but by the time we figured that out, word had already spread that we were having problems. And these penalties and missed deadlines are killing us financially. I felt a cold satisfaction, but I kept my voice professional. I'm sorry to hear that, Tom. Rebecca, I need to ask you something, and I know I have no right to ask. Is there any chance you'd consider coming back? Marcus realizes he made a huge mistake, and he's willing to admit that publicly. We could offer you a significant raise, a better title, whatever it takes. Before I could answer, Tom continued. I know Marcus and Linda treated you terribly, and I should have fought harder to prevent it. But this company is in real trouble without you, and I don't know how to fix it. Tom, I appreciate the call, but I need to think about it, I lied. I had no intention of going back, but I wasn't ready to close that door completely. The second call came an hour later, and it was from Patricia Williams at Blackstone Industries. Rebecca, I hope you don't mind me calling again, but I have a proposition for you, Patricia said. We've been watching what's happening at Morrison, and frankly, it's confirmed what we already knew. You were the secret weapon behind their tax strategies. I appreciate that, Patricia. Here's what I'd like to offer you. We want to create a new position, Director of Tax Strategy and Compliance. It would be a significant step up from your previous role. You'd have 2 junior staff members, a considerably higher salary, and equity participation in the company. But most importantly, you'd be working with leadership that understands and values your expertise. I felt my heart rate increase. That sounds very interesting. There's more. We've been approached by 3 of Morrison's former clients who are looking for new manufacturing partners. They specifically asked if we had anyone with your level of tax expertise. If you joined us, we'd have a real opportunity to win some significant new business. Which clients? I asked, though I suspected I already knew. Patterson Industries, Henderson Manufacturing, and Coastal Processing. Apparently, they're all concerned about Morrison's current tax compliance capabilities. I almost laughed out loud. Patterson, Henderson, and Coastal were 3 of Morrison's biggest accounts, representing probably 40% of their annual revenue. If Blackstone won those contracts, it would be devastating for Morrison and transformative for Blackstone. Patricia, I'm very interested. When can we meet to discuss the details? We scheduled a meeting for Wednesday morning. After I hung up, I sat back in my chair and marveled at how quickly things were changing. 3 weeks ago, I'd been fired and humiliated. Now I was being offered a dream job with the opportunity to work with clients who already respected my expertise. But the best part was still to come. On Wednesday afternoon, after my excellent meeting with Patricia and the Blackstone leadership team, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Marcus Morrison's direct line. "Rebecca, thank you for taking my call," Marcus said, and I could hear the stress in his voice. "I need to talk to you about coming back to Morrison. I think there were some misunderstandings about what happened, and I'd like to make things right." "Misunderstandings?" I repeated, keeping my voice neutral. "Well, it turns out the Patterson situation wasn't your fault at all. They sent us a follow-up email explaining that the error was on their end, and they were actually very happy with your work. Linda and we may have jumped to conclusions." "I see. And Tom has been explaining to me exactly how complex your job actually was. I have to admit, I didn't fully understand the scope of what you were doing. These tax incentive programs are much more complicated than I realized." "They are indeed. Rebecca, I'm calling to offer you your job back. Not just your old job, a better position with a significant raise and a formal apology. We've learned that you're not easily replaceable, and we want to make this right." I let the silence stretch for a moment. "Marcus, can I ask you something?" "Of course. 3 weeks ago, you fired me because you said I had attendance issues and had made a critical error that cost you a client. You refused to let me see the client email, refused to let me call the client to clarify, and refused to listen when I tried to explain. You and Linda made it clear that you thought I was incompetent and replaceable. What's changed?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment. I made a mistake. I should have listened to you, and I should have investigated the situation more carefully before making such a drastic decision. And now you want me back because? Because the company is struggling without your expertise, and I realize now how valuable you were to our success." I took a deep breath. "Marcus, I appreciate the call and the apology. But I have to tell you that I've accepted a position with Blackstone Industries. I start Monday as their Director of Tax Strategy and Compliance." "Blackstone?" Marcus's voice cracked slightly. "Rebecca, please, let's talk about this. Whatever they're offering you, we can match it. We need you here. It's not about the money, Marcus. It's about working with people who understand and value what I do. Blackstone approached me because they recognized my expertise and wanted to build around it. You fired me because you thought any young accountant could do my job better. I was wrong about that. Completely wrong. Please, just give me a chance to make this right. You had 8 years to make it right, Marcus. You had 8 years to recognize my contributions, to understand the complexity of my work, and to treat me with respect. Instead, you watched me save this company millions of dollars while giving me no credit, no recognition, and no appreciation. And when you needed a scapegoat for your own poor management, you chose me. Rebecca, please. I'm sorry, Marcus, but my decision is final. I wish you the best of luck finding someone to handle your tax compliance needs. After I hung up, I felt a sense of closure I hadn't expected. Marcus's desperation had confirmed everything I'd suspected. They'd fired me impulsively without understanding what they were losing, and now they were paying the price. But more importantly, I was moving on to something better. 6 months later, I was sitting in my new office at Blackstone Industries, reviewing the quarterly tax savings report I was about to present to the board of directors. The numbers were impressive. In my first 6 months, I'd identified tax strategies that saved Blackstone over $4 million, significantly more than I'd ever saved Morrison in a similar period. The difference was that at Blackstone, I had resources. I had 2 junior staff members who could handle routine tasks while I focused on strategy. I had a budget for continuing education and professional development. Most importantly, I had leadership that understood what I did and actively supported my work. Patricia had introduced me to the board as their strategic tax weapon, and the board members regularly asked detailed questions about our tax strategies during quarterly meetings. They didn't just appreciate the money I saved, they were genuinely interested in understanding how I achieved those savings. But the most satisfying part of my new role was working with Patterson Industries, Henderson Manufacturing, and Coastal Processing. All 3 companies had followed me to Blackstone, bringing their manufacturing contracts with them. They'd told their previous partners that they needed to work with companies that had strong tax compliance capabilities, and they'd specifically requested to work with me. The financial impact on Morrison Industries had been severe. Losing 3 major clients while simultaneously facing tax penalties and missed incentive deadlines had created a perfect storm. I'd heard through industry contacts that they'd been forced to lay off several employees and were struggling to maintain their market position. Marcus had called me twice more in the months after my conversation with him, each time sounding more desperate. The last call had come 3 months ago, and he'd offered me a partnership stake in Morrison Industries if I'd return and help them recover their tax compliance capabilities. I'd politely declined and suggested he hire a qualified tax consulting firm to help rebuild their capabilities. But the most meaningful conversation I'd had about my old job happened just last week. Tom, the former CFO at Morrison, had reached out to congratulate me on my success at Blackstone. He'd retired early due to the stress of dealing with Morrison's financial problems, and he wanted to apologize for not fighting harder to prevent my termination. Rebecca, I need you to know that firing you was the worst business decision I've ever seen in my career, Tom said. Marcus and Linda had no idea what they were doing, and I should have stopped them. I'm sorry I didn't stand up for you when it mattered. Tom, you were always supportive of my work, and I appreciated that, I replied. What happened was ultimately about Marcus and Linda not understanding the value of specialized expertise. They thought any young, eager employee could do my job, and they learned otherwise. They certainly did. I heard Marcus had to hire a consulting firm at 3 times your salary to handle the compliance work, and they still can't do what you did. After Tom and I hung up, I reflected on the lessons I'd learned from this experience. For 8 years, I'd made the mistake of believing that excellent work would automatically lead to recognition and appreciation. I'd assumed that if I was indispensable to the company's success, I would be valued and protected. But I'd learned that being needed is not the same as being valued. Morrison Industries needed my expertise desperately, but they didn't value me as a person or as a professional. They took my contributions for granted and assumed they could replace me easily. When they needed someone to blame for their own poor management, they chose me because they thought I was powerless. The real lesson was that I needed to work for people who understood and appreciated what I brought to the table, not just people who benefited from my work without recognizing it. At Blackstone, my expertise wasn't just tolerated, it was celebrated. My contributions weren't invisible, they were highlighted and rewarded. I'd also learned that my specialized knowledge was more valuable than I'd realized. For years, I'd thought of myself as just another employee doing my job. But the chaos that followed my departure from Morrison had shown me that what I did was actually quite rare and difficult to replace. That knowledge had given me the confidence to negotiate for better compensation, better working conditions, and better treatment. Last month, I ran into Linda from Morrison's HR department at a professional conference. She approached me hesitantly and asked if we could talk privately. "Rebecca, I owe you an apology," Linda said. "I realize now that I made a serious error in judgment when I recommended your termination. I didn't understand the complexity of your work, and I was focused on the wrong metrics." "Thank you for saying that, Linda. I've learned a lot about the importance of specialized roles since then. We've struggled to replace your capabilities, and it's been a humbling experience. I hope you can forgive me for my part in what happened." I looked at Linda and realized that I felt no anger toward her anymore. Her apology was sincere, and it was clear that she'd learned from the experience. More importantly, her opinion of me no longer mattered. I'd found my place with people who valued my contributions from day one. "Linda, I appreciate the apology, and I forgive you. We all make mistakes, and the important thing is that we learn from them." As I walked away from that conversation, I realized that my journey from Morrison to Blackstone had taught me the most important lesson of my career. True success isn't about being indispensable to people who don't appreciate you. It's about finding your place with people who recognize your value and want to build something great together. My expertise in tax compliance hadn't changed. I was the same person with the same skills. But now I was working with people who saw that expertise as an asset to be leveraged and celebrated, not a cost to be minimized or a problem to be managed. That distinction made all the difference in the world.